Well, good afternoon. Welcome into another episode of Interrupting Racism. I'm Brian Prawitz, and we're glad that you are here, whether you are watching live or afterwards on any of our platforms. You have found an effort for that started here recently that is meant to provide some insight, some opinion, hopefully some intelligence, another perspective out there into the world of divisive media, social and otherwise. And my hope is that you're able to learn from the people that we talk to, learn a little bit about how important diversification is, how important other people are that may or may not agree with you or that may or may not look like you. And so far, the response has been really fantastic. And we're thankful for you being here and for you watching. We'd love to see your comments, especially as the show goes on, because we are live and we can see comments as they come in, no matter which platform you happen to be watching on. And this is started out as kind of a labor of love for me, but now it's turned into something a little bit more official. And we're going to be learning more about that as we go on with today's program. And I want to welcome in a person that I've been able to know here for about a year or so. Lisa Watson is the executive director of ALF of Oregon. ALF stands for American Leadership Forum. And this Interrupting Racism podcast is kind of informally being adopted by ALF. In a way, it's a gift back to ALF. As from me, I'm an ALF senior fellow from class 34 a few years ago. And one of the tenets of ALF is to give back to and serve your community and serve Oregon. And that's what we're going to do with this podcast going forward. We probably will talk to many senior fellows most of the time, not exclusively, but not only is Lisa Watson the executive director of ALF, but she is also a senior fellow from class 30. Welcome to Interrupting Racism, my friend.
Thank you, Brian. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for doing this.
I'm very happy to have you along and looking forward to where this goes as we kind of roll this into and underneath the ALF umbrella, even though it's an informal partnership, because it's not like there's a huge sponsorship check being written to me or vice versa. It's more of let's just have some rich conversation with people who have had the ALF experience and understand that their perspective is not the only one, and that they've been vulnerable enough to learn from other people. So if we can do that, Lisa, my friend, we should be, making the world a better place.
That sounds like success to me.
Cool. Well, rather than me talking for the next hour or however long we're together, introduce yourself a little bit to folks. They may know you as the executive director of ALF, but give us your backstory.
Sure. I am a lifelong Oregonian, born and raised in Salem, Oregon, and I have the very rare blessing of being able to say that I spent the first few years of my life living on the grounds of the Oregon State Penitentiary. My father was the warden of the state penitentiary in Salem. So we had housing, where we lived was on the grounds of the penitentiary. I had a guard tower outside my bedroom window. Had a really interesting and really enjoyable upbringing in Salem. It's a community that I still love and care about. I have a lot of family still there in the Willamette Valley, and went to college all over. Went to Oregon State, went to Lynn Benton Community College, Chemeketa Community College, and landed in PSU, which is what brought me to Portland. And I have pretty much been here since college. A short foray living in Arizona, but other than that, I am all Oregonian. After college, had a career in the food industry. I was in sales for some food manufacturers across the country, including a name many people know, Sara Lee Foods, and was laid off from that job at around a time I was deeply considering going into business on my own. And I did that. My husband and I began a bakery called Cupcake Jones in Portland, and it ended up expanding to 2 locations. We had that for 10 years. We ran it as a sort of a philanthropic business from day one. We always donated a percentage of sales back to different nonprofits. And that's sort of how we built our brand. and sold it about 3 years ago. And since then, I've been back in the nonprofit sector and landed here at ALF about a year ago. Oh, Brian, I can't hear you.
Yes. Well,
There
why would it be a Zoom conversation of any type, even though we're using StreamYard, if I didn't have a mute moment there? Okay. That way I make the first bobble on the broadcast. Part of being live too, by the way.
Thank you. Makes me feel better.
I was just saying you've lived in a lot of places in the state of Oregon. Like, I mean, there almost aren't any places you haven't been, I guess maybe Southern Oregon, from an education standpoint. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So tell me about what attracted you to the position of being the executive director of ALF.
Sure. I have said since early on in my ALF program, just a few months in, it changed my personal and my professional life tremendously. Not only did it give me perspectives that I had not really dived deep into in the past about, particularly about the people who choose to live in the rural parts of our state. It really made me love and have an appreciation for rural Oregon that I hadn't had even as a lifelong Oregonian. We went to places I'd never been and might not have been to otherwise. We met people, just incredible people all over the state who were doing amazing work and living lives that were so different from my own. And so just having that new experience of people who are so different from me outside of my bubble really changed my perspective, and it definitely changed how I lead. But it also changed my life professionally. Just having new relationships with people that really helped me, literally helped me evolve and make decisions and give me some incredible connections once I made the leap back into the nonprofit sector, and have been incredibly supportive ever since then. So I have some of my best friends in the world came out of my ALF relationship, and continues as I've gotten to know more and more of the senior fellows from other classes. And I'm really fortunate that I had a lot of friends who already were senior fellows or have become senior fellows since. So it's just been an incredible personal journey for me as well, being involved with this organization. So it was a no-brainer when the position came up. I didn't hesitate.
Yeah. Well, you actually came in at a really critical moment for ALF too. There's a lot of change was going on, and surprise, a lot of changes continued to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, this has got to be one of the most, I don't know if you want to say most difficult times to be in a position like this, but it hasn't. I mean, we just had the gala, and in some ways, it was bigger than it's ever been.
It was, yeah. We had almost 370 computers, phones, and tablets watching, which I'm going to equate to at least 600 or 700 people. We generally would have a couple hundred people come to our gala. It really made it more accessible, specifically for people who don't live in the Portland area, because it's always taken place there. Very few people wanted to do the travel and stay the weekend, and it's expensive. So it made the gala much more accessible to a lot broader audience, for sure. And we had quite a few people that watched that aren't senior fellows that were interested in the program, or they work for a company that supports us and were interested in learning more. So it definitely gave us much more accessibility to people. Yeah. We reached a lot of folks.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your jam. So as you come to ALF and you've had all these different experiences, where does your heart and your passion lie when it comes to some of the things that we discuss in ALF, or some of the bigger issues facing the state of Oregon? This is a wide open question, because it really could land in a lot of places. Where's your passion in your heart and your jam?
Well, you might have to rein me in because I have a lot, but I will say, so I'm a tribal member of the Spirit Mountain, of the Grand Ronde tribe, out near Spirit Mountain, that area. And Indigenous issues matter a lot to me. I also, being an Oregonian and living in this state that has a very complicated history around race, racial issues are definitely have always been my jam. I also am a very passionate advocate for folks in the LGBTQ plus community. Just growing up, having so many friends and family members who identify somewhere in that spectrum, and seeing the challenges that they faced. For me, really deeply being impacted by the HIV crisis in the 80s and losing a lot of people that I knew back then gave me some really deep passion for that issue. And I'm super passionate, always have been, but particularly now, about voting and voting rights and voting access. I think that we as a country need a true representative democracy, and there are so many forces fighting against that right now. So I'm definitely really passionate about that also.
Well, a couple of things come to mind in the conversations you and I have had over the last year or so, certainly since George Floyd's murder and the response to that. I know also we talked, I believe, on the day that the Breonna Taylor result, if you will call it that, came down. And so it feels like if you're sensitive and open to paying attention to what people in Oregon are suffering through, it's kind of a long list right now. It's hard. So when you add Indigenous issues to that as well, and you throw LGBTQIA plus into the conversation, it seems like that conversation around equality could also land in a lot of different places as well right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it impacts all the other challenges we have, right? It's impacting the COVID challenge because we are seeing disproportionate sickness and death among communities of color. It's impacting fire response, right? There, if you were fully insured and had a lovely home and had time, the luxury of time to be able to get your most prized possessions out, you're having a really different experience than if you didn't have any of those things. So the disparities that we experience as a country are so much more amplified in times of great challenge like we're facing right now. But it also presents the opportunity for us to unveil those things so that we can try to create a way out on the other side that's better for everybody. So I see there's opportunity in all of this too.
So my background is from a fairly conservative family, middle class, white, educated, hetero, rural for the most part, nuclear family kind of thing. And I just recently went home, spent some time with some of my other family members, and they were watching we're big sports fans. So we're watching all the games that fortunately have come back. And we watched the Titans and the Chiefs on Thursday night when they came out and locked arms and they were booing in Kansas City. And then these commercials come on about equity and equality and about the fight that our African-American friends, for the most part, but anyone of color is fighting. And I was reminded of some really basic questions that are really interesting ones that people ask in frustration. And if you can take kind of the anger, the edge off of it, and you actually ask the question, for instance, which I'm going to ask you. I heard one of my family members say, "What do they want? What do they want? What is all of the, the rioting in Portland and the man, those, I'm sitting in Roseburg, Oregon. We have a tremendous conservative audience here. The comments around Portland and the rioting and what's happening is sometimes very hard to listen to. But the question of, as you mentioned, hopefully change can take place. And if you want to, I guess you have to dial it into which issue we're talking about here. But what does change look like? What will be enough? Is there such a thing?
Yeah, there is. It happens, right? It's happening now. I think one of the things that I can refer to as proof of this is the fact that in Portland, the city council did divert funds from our police department to programs that provide other types of response to police calls when it's appropriate. There was a program already ready to be launched. I think it was delayed a little by COVID, but its funding was increased because of the outcry from the community here. And I actually know a person who works for Cahoots in Eugene, which is the program that this one in Portland was somewhat modeled after. And it's very successful. They, the last statistic I heard is that they respond to, I think, almost 25, maybe even more than 25% of police calls. They don't end in violence, they end in service. And so there are things actually happening because of these protests. And I think they're going to continue. One of the things that we talk about a lot in American Leadership Forum is systems thinking and systems change. And one of the reflections that has been repeated a lot lately in these conversations has been, these systems aren't broken. They're working the way they were meant to work. They're just the wrong systems now. And they always have been, but it's coming forward. So we have opportunities to make changes in the systems that we have in our communities, in our governments, in our churches, in our synagogues. We have ways to make changes where we are being held accountable to be operating in a way that's equitable and that serves everyone. But with those, if these things weren't coming forward, if these things weren't being fought for, they would stay the same. And so to answer the question of what do people want, equality. It's not that people want to be treated better or differently. It's that all people should be valued and valued the same way. Right now, Black lives aren't. Indigenous lives aren't. People of color in general are not valued in the same way in this country. And that's what people are fighting for.
Very well said. And I wish there were ways to get that message in a vulnerable conversation with somebody who was open to listening to that conversation from a person that may not look like them, have the beliefs they do, to actually have that conversation. And I'm frustrated by the number of people that we can have this conversation, people that would naturally sit down and watch this. How many people don't agree and are opening to listening to that and then actually participating in that change? It's and so I look at it. I want to just bounce this to you. I look at it a couple of different ways. You have the policy level, but then you also have this personal level. And I'd say if there's one thing I've learned from ALF, it is how to have that conversation on a personal level where it doesn't come across as threatening. And there's love there if you do have somebody who will honestly want to know what it's like from a different perspective.
Sure.
And that's valuable. And I wish I could see that happening more in our society.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we build on, that I know this has been your experience because you shared this for our gala, is that we build on relationships and trust, right? That it's one thing for somebody you don't care about to yell and scream at you and tell you, I want equality. It's entirely a different thing for Brian Prawitz to be in Roseburg saying to somebody else, I'm fighting for my friends that I love and care about because they're not being treated equally. It's different. And so I think that's why, I appreciate so much that you are willing to put yourself in vulnerable positions and have conversations that make you uncomfortable, because you show that that's how we all learn and grow, right? The only way we can learn is by accepting first that there's something we don't know. And that is really uncomfortable, especially as adults, right? We're supposed to have this all figured out, know what we're doing. We're leaders in our communities. We're smart. We have all the answers. But for us to be able to stop and say, I don't know this. I don't understand this. I need to learn more about this is a really brave thing to do. And it makes you vulnerable. It makes you uncomfortable. But I think it's one of the strongest steps that people can take as leaders, particularly white people. White people fighting for equality for other people is such a strong thing to do, and it's so appreciated when it happens. And being able to put relationships at risk is a huge step.
I think a great place to start is to be able to say, maybe I am part of the problem.
Absolutely.
Maybe I am. Maybe I don't know. And sometimes the answer to that and the fact coming back to you actually is tough. It's hard.
Yeah. And even if it's sometimes I think the first step is just being willing to say, I benefit from it. I benefit from this system and this structure. It's different from saying I'm part of the problem. And I think you can get there. But I think a good entree is for white people to be able to say, I benefit from the system of structural racism that exists in our country. I don't intentionally benefit from it, maybe, but I do. And I think that's a really important first step. And then being able to come to that realization and then take it a step further after, some thinking, reflection, and conversation with other people to then be able to say, okay, how am I perpetuating it now? I think that's the next step. What can I do differently so that I can help change this? But I think you have to go through that first self-realization of just knowing that you're benefiting from it in some way is really important. It's a good first step.
Yeah. And then even admitting, in some places you have to admit racism exists.
Yes.
I mean, you got to start at such a basic level.
Yeah.
And there's even pushback in some places about that point, that conversation, just that thing, just that what I just said. Hey, guess what? Racism exists in blank, in blank. And it almost doesn't matter where you go, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned that from my friends of color. So if you're in Roseburg or any place else and you experience some thing that makes you uncomfortable and you say, where else can I go? Where else can you go? I mean, I think right now we're proving you really can't go.
It's everywhere. Yeah. I mean, we talk all the time about how Portland is seen as this bastion of progressive liberals that, have it all figured out. And I can tell you as a person of color in this city, there is an immense amount of racism in our city still. I see it. My friends see it. My family sees it. It is here. As you said, it is definitely everywhere. And I have to say, I have a really strong personal visceral reaction anytime a white person says racism doesn't exist. Yeah. And it's so insulting to basically say my experience isn't valid. What I've seen and experienced isn't true. Like it infuriates me. Just because you didn't experience it doesn't mean it's not real. It's real and it happens. Yeah.
So much talk has come around the African-American community, so much conversation around people of color. I have Native American friends who say, excuse me, over here, you are Native American. And I want to put in a few words for not just the POC, but the BIPOC community as well.
Mm-hmm.
To say, where do you feel like the argument for equality for Native Americans fits into the Black Lives Matter movement?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's our fates are intertwined 100%. I mean, racism, people aren't only racist against Black people. People are racist against people who aren't white. So our fates, our experiences in this country are intertwined, and they're all based in power, right? One of the most traumatizing things that has happened to Native Americans in this country in the last decade, I should say, is the Dakota Access Pipeline. That literally was a traumatizing moment for children in our community, for adults in our community, because the message from our government was that you don't matter at all. Your history doesn't matter. Your traditions, your sacred space, your families, your lives don't matter. And we're just going to plow through here for profit. And that is exactly the same as the types of violence that are happening to other communities. They're just different types of violence. But the message is the same. The message is that you matter less than our progress for profit, for oil, for money. And so I'll go back to what I said. Our fates are intertwined. All people of color's fates are intertwined. But I will say that I fully agree that the fate of Black people in this country is so much more heightened and visible and painful, and it re-traumatizes all people of color. It is also much more, publicly, it appears much more violent, much more full of much more hate. And it's really hard to see that happening to anyone. But I don't want to start, people saying my plight is worse than yours. It's not about that. It's about the fact that we are all, as people of color, Black and Indigenous, and all people of color, including, Asian Americans and East Indian people. I mean, all of us have experiences of racism in this country, and our fates are intertwined together. So we have to fight together. That's, it's been proven in all social justice work that allies are a key, right? We can't do this work alone. We need allies. We need white people to fight for us. And that is where success and victory can happen.
Can you explain that comment at the end there a little bit more? Why?
Yeah.
It's so important to hear that from people in my network too. What?
Yeah. What? I heard this actually. I heard this recently from a Black elder leader in the civil rights movement in Portland who said, we need our white brothers and sisters. And this is a person who was very active in the civil rights movement and has spent a lot of time with all different races. The reason we need white people is because there's power in whiteness. There is privilege in being white. And the people who are allies to our causes, who are white, are a bridge to understanding for other people. I love to give this example. Basic Rights Oregon used a campaign for marriage equality. And I think it was called, I might get this wrong, so I'm sorry if I did, but I think it was called One Conversation at a Time or something like that, where they literally had people sign up or commit to saying, I will have a conversation with a person who disagrees with me about marriage equality. And it was very successful. I think this was used by some national organizations in this marriage equality conversation as well. But if you have trusted people that will talk to you about something that is difficult to talk about, it's much easier for you to find a bridge to understanding that perspective rather than having people you don't know, don't trust. It goes back to me saying earlier, right? We build these bridges around trust and relationship. So if you can have difficult conversations, they're much more effective if you're having them with people you trust and care about. And so bringing white people along in this journey, a big role that can be played in that can be played by other white people.
I'm sure we could stay here in this line of conversation for a while, but when you talk just what you said there about the importance of those conversations with a trusted person who will be vulnerable with you and really be honest is sort of the opposite of what we see on social media and in media, the divisiveness. And if you haven't seen Social Dilemma, you need to.
I have.
And I think that the antidote to all that divisiveness are these conversations.
Yeah.
You can't just live on Facebook and feel like you're, woke.
Yeah.
And so I think that's so important, like what you said, and how divisive things are right now. I literally I don't trust anything I read anymore. I can't, not now, especially from now until November, 4th, if the sun comes up that morning, by the way. God, I hope so. That's actually, oof. I didn't even realize how much of a tingle that was going to give my spine to think that far ahead. But as we go toward election day, certainly, the chances to have some conversation with somebody who hasn't already cast their mind on where they're going to go is really, I guess you could say they're going to be hard to find possibly, but if you get them, what a priceless opportunity to just find out that, guess what? If we're not on Facebook yelling at each other and we do talk about these things, you might find that you're closer on a lot of things than you even realize. That's
what I would say was my experience in my ALF class, is that the understanding that I came away from my class experience was we all want the same things. Again, going back to your earlier question that, a relative of yours may have said, right? What do they want? We want peace. We want a place to live. We want food on our table. We want to be able to have a job. We want to succeed. We want to be able to serve our community. We want to feel fulfilled in our work, right? We all want the same things. And my understanding after my ALF experience was, yeah, I get that now. And we just want to do that in different ways. We have different paths to get there. And the paths to get there are what we don't agree on, right? I think we all still want peace, justice. Yeah. We all want safety. We want good schools for our kids. It's just the paths to get there sometimes are really, really different.
I'm gonna skate out on some thin ice here. I do not understand why that statement, what you just said, needs to be politicized.
Right.
Like, there's no reason why every conservative Republican who comes across this thing can't think and believe the same thing you just said.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And that was the common ground in my class, right? We had people in the class that their lived experience was so very different from mine. So could not have been more polar opposite. Mm-hmm. And I love them the same. And I appreciated their experiences so much and them sharing their homes and their families with us and just getting an understanding that, gosh, this is a life that is lovely. And it's not my life, but I appreciate it, right? And that's what our class did for me. And I think it made it easier for me to have conversations that might be hard. Like you were saying, I can have those conversations better now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've kind of gone, I think, through most of what I really wanted to talk to you about. But what are a couple of things? What's the message that you just really, really want to get out right now? Whether that's an ALF message or just something else. If you just had the open mic and the thing you'd like to make sure everybody knows, what would it be?
Vote. I think that the most important thing we can do is vote. Make sure that your vote is counted. We are so incredibly blessed in our state to have had, I think now over 20 years of voting by mail. I use the system where I get a text message that says when my vote was received, when my ballot was mailed. Like, it is an incredible system. I do not understand why this isn't nationwide. Our cases of voter fraud are so incredibly minuscule nationwide for vote by mail. I think it is the most equitable way for people to vote. And especially in Oregon now, where just this past year, we have the blessing of getting prepaid envelopes. You don't even have to buy stamps. So the as many barriers as can be removed have been removed so far. I think voter access is one of the most compelling and important issues of our time. And if we don't have access to voting, our democracy is dying. And it's dying in a million other ways right now, I believe, but that is the most vital backbone to who we are as a country, is access to voting. And so that is my message right now, is now and forever, is vote. It's your only way you can have, you're ensured to have an impact on the outcome of this country. And if you don't, you have no room to criticize. So it's your responsibility as an American to vote. As a resident or a person who lives in this country, you have to do it. That's my message.
And that's not necessarily a statement designed to try to get your guy or gal in either.
No, I truly want a representative democracy. I think that if our country elects a person who is different from my perspective, then that our country has spoken. But I think our country has to be allowed to speak, and every person in the country has to have access to that right.
While you were just talking about voting, the word art that came from Mostly Wada during the gala came to mind. And see him tear up towards the end when he said, "Our ancestors would be proud."
Yeah.
I think your ancestors would be proud of what you just said about voting. Here you are, a woman in the United States, Native American. Your people that you represent have not always had that right.
Right. Yeah. Not till recently.
No. And your powerful voice in that moment.
Thanks.
Struck that image of him leaning into the camera and talking
about
our ancestors.
He was amazing.
Proud of us and how far we've come. And
you
yet
should
we have so much further to come, of course.
Thank you. And you should, if you can, please feel free to share that video on your own page, because it was incredibly moving, incredibly beautiful work. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Well, anything else you want to leave us with?
Just gratitude, Brian. I think that the work that you're doing in your community, in your geographic community, but also just in your community of people you love and care about, is so important and amazing. And I know you hate attention for this stuff, but it's such a good example for ways that we can talk to people. You've been open and have been willing to share times when you have stumbled and been open to learning from other people. And I just think that is a fear that we as a country have to get over. We have to be willing to screw up and make mistakes and learn from them. And I think that's the root of why so much conversation gets halted, is because people are afraid. And I appreciate your bravery and willingness to step in it sometimes. And we all do that, but so many people are afraid to. So I'm really grateful that you have embraced this work. I'm glad that you met Burke Nelson, because clearly his relationship with you changed something in you, and it's really a beautiful thing to see. So thank you for being willing to share it with the rest of us.
I'm kind of stunned at how doing a fairly simple and straightforward thing that seems to be the right thing to do can be seen as that powerful. And I'm glad it is, because it doesn't feel like, there are harder things, I think.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I also really haven't been confronted by people in my own network who disagree with me very often.
Yeah.
I haven't had that moment yet. It hasn't cost me anything yet, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it will. It might. But if that happens, then fine, it'll happen. But
so one of
the opportunity to talk to other people who are civil and want to have a conversation about all these things and be able to sit and listen. There's no point in having that conversation with people that are just going to yell and aren't open. And but you know what else though? I found that there's a tremendous amount of there is a different level of interest, I think, in some of these conversations. I think there's that maybe the edge is beginning to come off of some of the people that don't want to talk about these things anymore. But then every time you think that happens, then somebody's window gets broken and you realize that maybe we haven't.
Right.
Maybe it's just, sometimes it feels like it might be futile, but we can't take that attitude, because if I can get one person that I know and trust and love to stop for half a second and find out what's driving me to do this. And when I tell them that friends of mine from Portland who are afraid to come to Roseburg because they're Black, to me, it ends. It's just over. Yeah. There's no other point that needs to be made. That has to get fixed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's the right thing to do, to speak up. I mean, in case anybody hasn't seen your first video that you did a few months back, the thing that really spoke to me was that you said that, you were kind of wondering, what can I do? And Burke said, just say something, right? Just speak up. And I think that's the point, right? It normalizes this conversation. It makes it, I will tell you, among, my primary group of friends are mostly white. And we've started talking about stuff we've never talked about before. So it's just like becoming a part of our culture to have conversations about race, around how people are treated in this country, around our history, right? We're talking about the history of our state, the history of our country, the painful past that we have. And that needs to be normalized. I think that's the only way we can move forward, is if we normalize having conversations, because as you're saying, we're spending too much time either screaming at each other or fighting on social media. And I have stopped the social media thing, except in cases where I am tapped in. And I have been tapped in by some of my white friends who have said, can you please come and help me with this? Like, I will do it if I have the time and capacity. But I also have had to be very aware of my own self-care. And I've had to be very particular about when I will do that, because I have to be rested and not recently traumatized and steeled for it. And then I can be really effective. So I choose my times. But yeah, I think making the conversations more normal is a huge move in the right direction.
Yeah, I really want to swear off Facebook, but then I decided to stick with it and do stuff like this on it instead.
Right.
I'm really, sometimes I get mad at my conservative Republican fellow voters. And then I decide I'm going to stick right there in that party, because I still believe in the tenets of the Republican thoughts. And I want to be the unicorn that's talking about some of these issues, and other people that don't like that to do that with us too. And
it feels productive, right? It feels like you're doing something that's helpful and productive instead of destructive.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, real quick, finish off with maybe a couple of books that you would recommend for people to read.
Oh, sure. I am a huge fan of Ibram Kendi. I'm actually going to another event with him on Thursday night, How to Be Anti-Racist. That's one of my favorite books. And I would recommend reading anything by Ijeoma Oluo. She's an incredible writer, I think out of Seattle. She wrote, So You Want to Talk About Race was her really breakout, incredible book. I'm a big fan of reading Black authors about race. And yeah, those are the two that I have on my nightstand and pick up and read and revisit often.
I've got like 6 books on my nightstand. Everybody keeps giving me more stuff to read. I can't keep up. You want to to read an amazing story about the Oregon Territory and the history behind the settling of the Pioneer West and Chief Joseph, Thunder in the Mountains is an amazing.
Oh yeah, I heard you mention that. Yeah,
I got a hold of that after my trip to Grand Ronde, actually, and that really rocked my world and was very, very good. And then I just finished The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates.
I haven't read that yet. I have it, but I haven't gotten to it yet. Yeah.
The World of Me, of course, is next.
That I have read that. It's amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
Well, I'll pick it up next when I go home. So
yeah.
Lisa Watson, the executive director of ALF Oregon. If you want to learn more about ALF, go to alforegon.org. And we've got a website with these shirts and a few other sayings on them at speakupwithus.com. We'd love it if you'd go there. The money that is generated from the sales of those T-shirts is going to the Black United Fund of Portland. And we're building up another order. So it'd be great to get another set of a whole bunch of these shirts going out all over the state.
And I'll tell you, they start conversations. I wear these on my hikes and people talk to me all the time.
And that is awesome because that's the whole idea. So
it's great.
Bless you, Lisa. What a great conversation. Thank you so much. And I know I'll be talking to you again very, very soon. And thank you for watching here on Interrupting Racism. Be sure to share this with friends. And we'll get the word out as we try to do what we can to make things a little bit better out there. Fight the divisiveness and the racism that we know exists. Admit that it exists and then go to work on it. And we'll see you again on another episode soon.
Thank you so much, Brian. Take care. Thanks, everyone.